Hello, everyone. We are back in the lab to go a little bit more in depth with what we heard from Arne Slot in his pre-match press conference. I've been having a few technical issues, so I decided to try out something a little bit different. We're recording this at home with my computer rather than the camera. Let me know what you think. But back to the press conference. It's strange because it's very much a biggest game of the season, the biggest game of the season, should I say. Arsenal against Liverpool, a Super Sunday blockbuster. And yet it all felt a little bit understated within the room. I had a fascinating conversation with some of the other journalists before we got going, and people are struggling to find really good, interesting questions because Liverpool are just winning. There's no ups or downs here at the moment. It's all just ups. There was no big transfer rumors this week, no big movements on the big contracts. So it all felt a little bit like, well, same again, really. And I think that kind of played out across the press conference. And Arne Slot, he was in good mood. He was able to answer the questions nicely. He still got some really good answers out of him on some of them. But yeah, it didn't really feel like the big blockbuster, big game and all of the requisite tension you often felt with some of the previous managers' press conferences. But I guess that's just something we're going to have to get used to. Maybe as we get further into the season and these games matter even more, we'll see a little bit something different. But as is normally the case when there isn't a big transfer rumor to kind of dive into, he started with team news, and there's been no change in terms of the three who missed the last game in Diogo Jota, Federico Chiesa, and Connor Bradley. Chiesa and Bradley may well be training, but Jota is definitely out. He was asked about Alisson as well. He said that he's well into his recovery, but he's not in the back half of his recovery. Make of that what you will. But in terms of the three who I've previously mentioned, I wasn't surprised to see that none of them look like they're going to be involved against Arsenal. But as it stands, I think Liverpool's still in good shape. I think Joe Gomez comes in to the Connor Bradley role, giving Trent a rest whenever it's necessary, and he's performed it very well so far this season. Up front, it's a little bit more interesting because Darwin Núñez is pretty much the only recognised striker we have. He's been performing fantastically well, but there's going to come a time when you want to either take him off to rest him, or maybe it's not working for him, and we get to see what some of the other options look like. It was instructive, maybe, on Wednesday night that we saw Cody Gakpo in the central role for the first time this season. Obviously, we've seen Mo Salah and Luis Diaz play at different times in their Liverpool career, so it remains to be seen whether or not Arne Slot believes that they are viable options for that, or whether or not it will just be a case of Gakpo going back into the role that, frankly, I'm not entirely sure he enjoys. But we'll have to wait and see on that. Slot was asked about Arsenal and about the threat that they pose and whether this is the biggest and toughest game so far of the season. And again, it was a slightly interesting answer. He compared Chelsea and Arsenal very similarly, so that they play very similar tactics in terms of their fullbacks inverting. He also said that he expected Arsenal to be seen as the bigger game because of how they finished last season above Liverpool and above Chelsea, but it remains to be seen whether that will play out on the pitch. Obviously, it being an away game does make it a bit more of a difficult game. And again, this was something that I picked up on. Slot seems to be very, very focused in on the difficulty of playing away in this league. And considering so far he's won every away game he's played, you'd have to say that this kind of attention to detail in that area seems to be working out quite well. But he acknowledged the fact it's going to be a very difficult game against a very tough opponent. So he was also asked about taking points off of your potential title rivals. He didn't go so far as to say that he definitely knew that Arsenal and Liverpool would be competing for the title, but he looked at last season and said that if Liverpool had won those games that they played against the top two, I believe Liverpool took 3 points out of 12, and they finished 9 points behind Man City. So you can do the mathematics and work out that Liverpool would have been 9 points better off if they'd have won all 4 of those games, and Man City would have been, at least 2 points worse off. So Liverpool would have been champions. So obviously there is a lot of interest and a lot of importance put on these games, even at this early stage of the season. Another thing Slot was asked was about the difficulty of playing 3 games away on the bounce, as we have been with Leipzig, with Arsenal, and with Brighton away in the League Cup next week. But Slot kind of played down the difficulty within that, saying that these are experienced players who are used to playing in Europe year in, year out, which often involves going away on multiple games on the bounce, maybe 2 or 3 times in 1 week. So they know how to look after themselves. They've got a fantastic staff that helps them in terms of their recovery, in terms of working out sure they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. One thing he did flag up, though, was the fact that in all 3 cases, our opponents have an extra day to prepare than we do. Now, this wasn't like last week where he was making points about scheduling and trying to kind of get a few digs in here and there. I think it was just something that he acknowledged as a part of the game itself, and something that we should probably be aware of, or he certainly is going to be aware of in terms of when he's making his preparations for the game. Whether that means we'll see a little bit more rotation, I suspect for the Brighton game, there may well be the heaviest rotation we've seen so far. Maybe that comes into play as well. The manager was also asked about what his targets and expectations were before the season. And to be fair, he didn't really have much truck for this kind of line of questioning. And that's something that we've seen consistently from him in these press conferences. And he's not the only manager who goes down this road. A lot of the time when there's a question that they don't really want to ask, they say, oh, well, I'm just concentrating on the next game. I'm very short term in my remit, just making sure we win the next game and then going on to the next one and on to the next one. And it makes sense to a large degree, because when you're a manager, particularly a manager coming into a new club, you want to make sure that everyone kind of stays level, whether the results are really good or whether the results are really bad. And this is a perfect way of doing it. Just concentrate on the next one, get that 1-1, move on again and again. And at this point, it's probably really handy for Arne Slot, because everybody's got a new fantastic stat to throw at him about how Liverpool have never done this, or won 6 away games, or won 11 out of 12, or conceded this little goals in this short amount of time. And again, in the wrong hands, someone could get carried away with all those things. It looks like we don't have the wrong hands. It looks like we have a manager who's very much level-headed, and this is just another example of how he tries to deal with everything in exactly the same way, and hopefully his players will do the same. He was asked about the superb defensive record, as I just referenced there. And that was another one of the little fascinating nuggets that he gave us in terms of how he breaks down exactly what it is that causes or that great defensive record. He put it into 3 different categories. He mentioned the first one was when Liverpool have the ball more than their opponents, which kind of makes sense, because when we have the ball, it makes it harder for the opponents to score. In fact, you could almost say it's impossible for the opponents to score when we have the ball. So being able to dominate the ball and dominate games is a big part of being defensively sound. The second part is when we don't have the ball, you've got to have a good work ethic. And you've seen that. Chelsea was the perfect example of that. The players really put in the effort to close down their opponents, to track back, to throw themselves in the line of fire when necessary. And they were able to do that for sustained periods over the course of a 95-plus minute football game. And I think that's a really important part of it. But once again, I think with a nod to the people who came in before him, he mentioned the quality of the players we've got in the squad, specifically the goalkeepers and the centre halves. Now, in a later question, he did answer the fact that he expects Liverpool to defend with 11 players. So he's not putting it all on the centre backs and the goalkeeper, but it's clear that they are the fulcrum of any defensive structure in our Arne Slot team. And he's right. We've got some fantastic centre backs and 2 very, very, very good goalkeepers. And that's played a massive part in how we've been able to get such a great defensive record. But anyway, let's see what he had to say about my question. Hi, Arne. I want to kind of return to something I spoke to you about before. It's kind of retaining slender leads in games. Now, last time we spoke after Wolves, it was very much about towards the end of the game, you were concerned about not taking chances, but weren't really concerned about giving up shots. Whereas in recent games against Palace, Leipzig and Chelsea, that's kind of changed. I believe it's 20 shots in the last 20 minutes of those games compared to 11 for Liverpool. Do you think maybe there's an element that Liverpool have been so good at defending these slender leads that it's starting to affect the balance between attack and defence towards the end of games?
I think every game has its own story. So the Leipzig game, I just said about the difference in the period of rest we had in between the games. So that could be a factor where Leipzig was in the end of the game a bit better than we were. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but it could. I think when I look at the Crystal Palace game, it was 1 or 2 transition moments where we were still, in my opinion, dominating the game, but we were a bit unlucky, or we didn't have the rest defense good enough in order to concede, combined with some set pieces. And I think the last chance Chelsea got was also from a set piece. So I liked, it was only the last 6 minutes of injury time where we had at Leipzig, where we constantly had the ball and controlled it, and those moments were not difficult. So also the Leipzig game, the first chance they had in the last 10 to 15 minutes was from a second phase set piece. But yeah, you also concede a set piece if the other team is a bit stronger than you at that moment. So no, I'm not worried, but I prefer to see that we dominate till the end of the game. But it's also good to see that if we have to defend, that we have a team that defends with 11, with 2 outstanding centre backs and a goalkeeper that makes saves as well.
Once again, I am thankful to Arne Slot for his fascinating and detailed answer to my question. The first thing that struck me was that, unlike me, he doesn't see those last 3 games as a trend. He deals with each of them individually and thinks every game has its own story, as he said, which I love as a line. Obviously, with Leipzig, he referenced again the fact that they've had a day more recovery, so maybe that was why they had a greater energy towards the end of the game. With Crystal Palace, it was more about us dominating and them using transitions to try and get a pass. But the most fascinating nugget of all of this, and something I've picked up on a couple of times that he's referenced in other press conferences, is how he sees set pieces. Because he kind of used it as well, there was a set piece there, and there was a set piece there, kind of inferring the fact that in his mind, set piece chances conceded aren't the same as chances conceded through open play. Now, I'm only inferring here based on what I think he's meaning, but it seems to be as if in his mind, set pieces and chances from set pieces are an inevitability within football. They're the kind of thing that you can't really stop. So they don't really count against the defense and against the defensive game plan in quite the same way as chances from open play, which is interesting because if I'd have had the chance to ask a follow-up question, what I would have said is that while that's true that set pieces are an inevitability, when you're facing a team like Arsenal, who have created more chances and scored more goals from set pieces than anyone else, and in the last time they played one of their big title rivals, that was one of the key battlegrounds that Arsenal comprehensively won. I don't think you can kind of dismiss set pieces as something that you can't really control or you can't really do anything about. I mean, we've seen Liverpool be very dominant from set pieces as well, and we've got 2 of the best when it comes to aerial duels in Konate and Van Dijk, and you'd think that these are the perfect examples of a time when that would come in really handy. So I would be fascinated to know how he feels exactly about set pieces and how important he feels they will be within the outcome of this game. I guess we'll have to wait and find out. But as I said, there wasn't a massive amount that came from this press conference from Arne Slot. He did answer a few questions interestingly, as I said, but I think it's one of those where it didn't necessarily match the hype that I'm expecting to hear around the game, particularly when we get to Sunday and the build-up really begins. But as long as Liverpool keep winning these games and keep making it boring for us journalists, I'm sure most fans out there won't complain. So thank you very much for listening to this review. If you like what you've seen, but don't forget to like it, to comment it, and to subscribe for more just like this. If you want to hear what I have to say when it's written down, I've got a Substack page where you can go. I will be putting out content most Mondays. There will be a new article out there, so go and follow me, subscribe over there as well. But you can also kind of find me on social media. I'm very, very active on Twitter, on Instagram, and on TikTok as well. So there's plenty of chances for you to get your little dose of Mo. Thank you. I'll see you again soon.